G'day, ZiggyD here, and welcome back for some more Path of Exile Awakening. In this video I want to give you guys a quick update on the character I've been working on, what I've been playing in 2.0 since the untimely death of my summoner. Since then I have re-rolled as another Scion, but I am instead this time playing Explosive Arrow. I wanted to play a bow build again, but I didn't want to go back to playing Tornado Shot, Split Arrow, Ice Shot, Lightning Arrow. All those builds play pretty much the same, and they are all very quite good in 2.0 at Endgame. But I've played tons of builds like that, so I wanted to play something a little edgier, a little more unique. So I was sort of deciding between Poison Arrow and Explosive Arrow, both of which look really good in 2.0, especially really good as starting out builds in leagues. Now, neither are particularly good to level with by themselves, but both can be leveled fine with either Flame Totem Firestorm, like I showed off in a previous video, or they can be leveled with just things like Cleave into Sweep with leveling two-hander uniques and stuff like that. And that's how I leveled this character. I leveled this character up until 28 with Sweep, but I would recommend going up until 38 when you get GMP, because Explosive Arrow without GMP is not so good. So as far as Poison Arrow versus Explosive Arrow goes, I would say that Explosive Arrow is a bit faster clear speed, probably a little bit stronger overall, but it is not quite as safe. Now, Explosive Arrow has some inherent risks to reflect, and that is the greatest concern I have with this character. Without any real damage scaling on this character, you know, we have a little bit of efficient damage scaling, but without going too crazy on damage scaling, I'm already worried about the potential of a reflect death, because there's just the damage that you can put out, like overlapping AoEs, very high damage explosions, is quite insane and also quite scary as a hardcore player. Even with what I'm at now, level 72 with about 5.2k life, we're going to get easily a couple more K life, and I'm still pretty worried about what reflect is going to be like. So I'm running a Ruby at the moment, and I'm doing things like running increased flask charges gained, and to try and keep that Ruby up as much as possible. Like whenever I'm off-screening, I'm going to be making sure that Ruby's up and so on. And you know, I'm playing even in lower level maps at the moment, until I'm sort of like confirm my safety against reflect and test a few different ways of dealing with reflect. I am you know, I'm playing somewhat cautiously, clearing a lot slower than I potentially could. Like I could be 5-stacking all of these packs and just you know, instantly wiping them out. I'll show you how much damage you can do with 5-stack Explosive Arrow. Just one-shots pretty much everything. So, but you do need to watch out for that that Thornflesh pack that can appear. So the decision between Poison Arrow and Explosive Arrow is, I'd say that Poison Arrow clears a little slower than Explosive Arrow, and it doesn't quite have the same sort of feel and impact. Like I would say that something like Explosive Arrow is a little more fun, is a little more immediate. You get that kind of feedback from the explosions, but Poison Arrow is undoubtedly safer. It doesn't have that risk to reflect, and you can chuck down that Poison Arrow off screen and you know, off screen degenerate mobs and, you know, kite back and wait for them to die to the degen. Like you have a lot of safety with something like Poison Arrow. Let's get my little golem out. So that's kind of the rundown of Poison Arrow versus Explosive Arrow. Nonetheless, I felt like, well, we did a bit of a vote, and the vote came out as Explosive Arrow being more popular, which is unsurprising given that it is a bit more of an exciting playstyle. And I'll tell you what, Explosive Arrow is insanely fun. It is such a fun skill to use. Pretty much a little bit after you switch to it around 38. Like when I said, when you can get GMP, start running greater multiple projectiles with 5 penetration, things like that. In your setup on Explosive Arrow, that's when it starts to become insanely fun. And from that point onwards, it's an absolute pleasure to level through. It's pretty bad if you do switch at 28 with LMP. It feels pretty rough then. But ever since 38, I would, if I redid it, I would level melee all the way up until 38. But ever since then, it's been an absolute blast. No pun intended. So here's kind of what I'm running so far, Explosive Arrow wise. I am using a Quill Rain. You get two options with Explosive Arrow really. It comes down to either Quill Rain or it comes down to a +3 bow. So that's a bow gems, +2 bow gems, +1 all gems bow, and that's kind of +3 bows. Probably like that's on a fast base, like a thicket with attack speed roll, and then just a +3. That's something that's a bit more oriented towards high single target damage and good party scaling. Quill Rain's undeniably going to be faster, I think, in solo clearing, just because of the speed it allows you to put out those 5 stacks. So, for those of you guys a little new to Explosive Arrow, it's a rather unique skill. Explosive Arrow fires out a charge that creates a secondary explosion effect. Now, the secondary explosion isn't an actual attack. It's not an attack, it's not a spell, but it is a projectile damage-based AoE fire explosion. So the more charges you stick into an enemy, the more instances of those damage that stacks up, so the explosion becomes more and more potent, and the size of the explosion also becomes larger and larger the more of those you stack up. Up to about 5, I think it's 5 is the max charges you can get on any one enemy. Now you can stick them into walls and have them explode like that, and you can imagine if a rare is standing here that you have insanely high single target damage potentially, because those explosions can all overlap. Now, although shotgunning from projectile attacks and stuff has been removed, this is an overlapping area of effect, so you can still get that shotgunning effect on enemies, so you can have insanely high single target as well as very good AoE clear as well. So Explosive Arrow is quite unique because it's not using actual attack damage. You can use something like Quill Rain that has 50% less weapon damage, because Explosive Arrow doesn't actually deal weapon damage. It has its own damage independent of the weapon. It's a very unique and interesting skill to build around. Currently I'm using Explosive Arrow with 5 penetration, increased area effect, faster attacks, and greater multiple projectiles. The idea is just to get as many charges out as quickly as possible, and then just let the explosion occur. 5 penetration helps a lot versus fire-resistant mobs and single targets. And increased area of effect is actually a DPS increase most of the time because it helps the explosions overlap. But you can do just fine clearing on a 4 link though. I just happened to pick up this 5 link here for a couple chaos, so I decided to level with it, and I'm still using it at endgame. Eventually aiming with a build like this to switch into something like Comb's Heart, because you don't really need the 5 link on the chest. Once you get your Quill Rain or your bow 5 linked, then you can just use that instead. Now, you'll notice I'm using Frostwall as well. That's a way to help with single target. When you have something like this gorilla here in the open that is kind of not really standing by too much other stuff, then you can chuck a Frostwall down, and that helps you stick additional fuses near the enemy. So when I shoot the Frostwall, it's a little buggy. Sometimes it just doesn't work, but you'll see additional explosions go off. Now, there's a few things that happen with the Frostwall that are quite interesting. When you're standing close, you'll only stick 1 charge in and the rest will go through. And sometimes the explosion animation bugs out too. So there's a couple of bugs there, but it's still a great way of increasing your potential single target. You can see how a lot of them kind of disappeared? There's definitely some bugs to be worked out there that I'll pass on to ZiggyD, but a lot of the time those explosions are still occurring. They're just kind of the animation is bugging out. Nonetheless, though, you can use it as a significant single target damage increase against bosses and rares and stuff like that are not near an actual wall. If they're near an actual wall, then you can just kind of stack up charges like that. Like, I could have probably potentially stacked them up on a tree like that, and that does insanely high single target damage, so we get access to that. You can later set up like an Ignite secondary setup, like a 4 link or something, or even a weapon swap with a +3 bow for single target damage, where you use something like Conk Effect, 5 penetration, chance to ignite, increase burning damage, something like that. Makes for a pretty good single target setup. You 5 stack a boss, let the ignite happen, you know, curse them with flammability, and then just let the ignite kind of one-shot them, and you'll see maybe later we'll do some like boss one-shots or something with a setup like that to sort of show how it works, but for now, I'm doing fine with just the AoE setup, which can kind of, you know, with a bit of Frostwall action and with a bit of good positioning against walls, can be used just fine for single target. Now, I do still have a Flame Totem on my skill bar there, which I'm not really using anymore, so I'm probably going to drop that soon, but I did level with that from 38, well, from 28 when I switched onwards, just as a way to get a little bit of extra single target, and it also kind of works like a pseudo decoy totem that deals damage, so you can kind of chuck that down, have enemies attacking that, chuck a Frostwall on top of it, stack out some fuses, and then cause the explosions to go off on top of the Flame Totem. So it's a nice little kind of supplementary skill, and when you have a Flame Totem out and a Fire Golem out, they sort of help do a little bit of tanking for you as well. As I said though, I'll probably drop that soon. I am currently running Flammability just on self-curse with faster casting. It's really not needed for most mobs, but you know, something like a boss, I can curse Flammability. I'll take out the blues here. This is a nasty pack of snakes there. Like, you will be able to take them down. So I can chuck down a Frostwall, and there's this guy here. There's actually 2 bosses on this one, and get a pretty potent ignite. And you can see that one explosion took him down below half-life, so We can potentially be getting single shots on bosses in the future, but definitely not hard. And you can see that the single target doesn't really struggle when you sort of creatively use these skills like this. As you saw the Frostball buggy out there, it can be pretty buggy at times though. Oh, I found a Rigvold's Charge. That's an easy couple chaos in hardcore. Awesome stuff. I'll give you a brief overview of what I'm running passive tree-wise so far and some of my thoughts overall. There are a couple different ways to build Explosive Arrow. You can kind of... I think Scion is the best start in general. If you're not going to be getting Scion, you're going to be doing some awkward pathing around Scion potentially, especially if you go for a tree like this. There's a couple different ways of building though. You generally want to be sticking with the left side of the tree. Most Explosive Arrow builds will be Blood Magic. And that's because Explosive Arrow is extremely expensive. As you can see, 96 mana cost. And I have an attack time of 0.17. So that's like, I just like rough napkin math off the top of my head, it's like 500 HP a second or something. So you can see that there's no way, it's very, very difficult to build mana to keep up with something like that. So you need a lot of like mana cost reduction and you know, maybe like Orion rings and then running Clarity and things like that to run that on mana. I have seen mana based Explosive Arrow builds, but I think Explosive Arrow, because of the combination of it being super expensive and because of the fact that there's not many auras that actually really affect it that much. Haste allows you to put things out a little faster, so that's okay. And Arctic Armor would be nice for like just defensive purposes, and as would Purity of Fire. But overall, I think that aura-wise, this is a build that can get away without auras, one of the few, and because of it, it's synergized, you know, it has such a high mana cost. You can go Blood Magic and get a bunch of extra survivability, 35% increased mana, increased life behind Blood Magic here is pretty insane for the 3 points behind Blood Magic. It sorts out our mana problems and gives us a bunch of extra survivability. Pretty easy to get like 220 to 230% life on a Explosive Arrow tree like this. Getting like 9k life is possible even without a Calm's Heart, so it's you can build pretty insanely defense-wise and cover that with just either regen or leech. So, you know, we're getting most of the HP from the tree as we go around. Things like the Constitution will get the full wheel here, all the HP over here, all the HP over here. Might get Bloodless. We'll probably go in and get Unrelenting for the reduced mana cost, because reducing the cost of Blood Magic casting gives us a little more survivability as well. The life in here. Tempest section is nice. A little bit of attack speed. Attack speed actually works pretty well if you're using a Quill Rain. My initial thinking would be that it wouldn't actually be very useful given that it's already a fast thing, but once you have high base attack speed, you get kind of an even greater benefit from the attack speed, and this style of play with the Quill Rain is about getting those 5 charges out as quickly as possible. So we get the AoE as well, which, as I said before, helps with overlapping, and we get things like Explosive Impact that's like fire damage and stuff. You really don't need much actual damage on the tree, and you notice that I have like the damage here, there's a little bit of damage from Amplify, some damage there, and then I have some damage over in Shadow, but it's not very much at all. You can get a bit of damage on jewels, so things like area damage, area and fire damage, there's another area damage one there. That's just a life jewel. You can run just all life jewels, and I think I would still kill things really quickly even then. I've actually switched over to more life jewels. This is a life ignite one because this is, rather than, I had an area damage, fire damage jewel before, and I was becoming more and more concerned about reflect, so I thought, alright, how about we go life ignite jewels so that we get more ignite damage to help deal with single targets and stuff, but we are safer as well because we're running more life rather than just running raw damage. So reflect is my greatest concern. And there's a few ideas I'm tinkering with, maybe dealing with this. One of the crazier ones that's been brought up is Infernal Mantle. Infernal Mantle converts some of your fire damage to chaos damage. I don't know about that one. That one might be a little edgy, but it could be something we test if I still feel like I'm having some troubles. There is this ring here, which is pretty terrible, Sibyl's Lament, but it does help reduce reflect damage, at 30% reduced reflected damage taken, and this could be the difference between life and death. So I am considering using this. At the moment, I'm just using this high HP Chaos Resist ring I picked up, but we could switch over to Sibyl's Lament because 30% reduced reflect damage taken could be really quite nice, even though it's a pretty bad ring in general. The other thing is Vile Pact, and that's kind of the reason why you kind of have the choice between Shadow and Witch. Both are pretty good. You get pretty good HP in Witch. You get the AoE, which is a really nice bonus. And you can get things like Heart of Flame and even Breath of Flames if you want to go for a more Ignite focused, even though this is what's called an Impact Explosive Arrow build, focusing on the actual explosion rather than Ignite. we went for, I decided to switch to Shadow after initially planning Witch because it seemed like more and more as we progressed, Vile Pact was becoming necessary. I was starting to get scared of Reflect even in like early Merciless, so I'm very concerned about Thornflesh in maps. So picking up Vile Pact was probably going to be one of those solutions as well. So we have a few options here. We have things like Sibyl's Lament, the chest armor that I mentioned, Vile Pact. Someone also did some rough math on using Purity of Fire on life, although it will reserve 17% of our life with just Mortal Conviction. It could give something like a 25% increase of our effective life pool against reflected damage, and since that's the thing I'm worried about killing me most, we're gonna have like 9k life. I'm gonna be getting all the endurance charges, or 2 of the endurance charges from the tree, I should say. So I'll be running 5 endurance charges, and we'll have like 8 to 9k life. We should be fine against pretty much everything, and Reflect is the thing I'm mostly scared of. So running a Purity of Fire, although it seems weird to run that on life, it might actually be worth it. So that'll be one of the things I experiment with moving forwards, assuming we don't die before we get to that point. If we do die to Reflect, then we'll be able to do a whole bunch of experimenting and see what we can do to prevent that in the future. But for now, I'm going to progress slowly and see what I can do, and slowly feel it out and test it and see what I can find out in regards to dealing with Reflect. I've kind of dwelled on the Reflect thing a lot, and that just highlights that it's my primary concern with this, and the fact that that's my only real concern with this, I think is kind of highlights how strong Explosive Arrow is right now. I think if you guys want to play Explosive Arrow in like Warbands or Softcore, you can just forget the Vile Pact thing, just run regen, run Blood Rage for extra frenzy charges, get a little more damage scaling in the tree. You're only going to die every now and then to Reflect. It's not going to be that common. Rubies will take care of it most of the time. It's just in hardcore you can't rely on rubies 100% of the time, because having ruby up 100% of the time is not super reliable, and you're eventually going to make an error and off-screen a Thornflesh pack or something like that. Not a big deal in Softcore, especially below like level 95. After then you want to start maybe thinking about Vile Pact, but before level 95... you guys can go nuts on damage and really enjoy a build like this. Still a very good hardcore option though. From what I've played so far, I think it's very cheap and efficient to the survivability and damage you get as well. The only thing that's kind of holding it back at the moment is Quill Rain is super high demand at the moment because Explosive Arrow is becoming quite popular. So getting a Quill Rain itself can be quite expensive, but once you do get a hold of one, and you can just use fast thickets like a thicket with attack speed until you get a Quill Rain. Yeah, that's the only thing that's kind of holding it back price-wise. Everything else is literally just life and resist, super basic gear, and you can get by with like super cheap quivers as well, with just like life and resist on them as well. You don't need anything like crit chance or weapon ellie or any of that, because none of it affects Explosive Arrow. So guys, hopefully you found this little preliminary look at what I'm up to in Path of Exile interesting. Feel free to ask any questions you have down in the comments below. If I survive on this character and if it goes well and I learn some more things, then I will potentially produce a final build guide as well. I just wanted to keep you guys updated on what I'm up to, since it has been a little while since my last video. Anyway, that's it for now. I'm ZiggyD, and thanks for watching.